Your secret papers paid for my new truck, my brother said after emptying the safe in my basement. My mother smirked. Now he looks like the successful son. I stayed quiet, sent one text, and watched his smile die when the agents stepped onto the porch. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon in late April, while I was standing on a roof in East Brainerd with a nail gun in my hand and the sun cutting straight through my shirt. Marcus Ford, one of my better clients. He'd hired me the previous fall to re-roof his rental property on Wilcox Boulevard, and we'd stayed in touch the way good clients and contractors do, occasional check-ins, a referral here and there. I pulled off my gloves and answered. "Evan," he said, and his voice had a particular flatness to it, the kind people use when they're trying to be polite about something that isn't polite. "I just wanted to make sure everything was squared away on the Wilcox job. Your brother came by this morning and picked up the final check. Said you sent him." I stood on that roof for a moment with the phone against my ear and the wind coming off the ridge. I had not sent anyone. I do not have a business partner. I do not have employees who collect payment on my behalf. Briggs Construction is me, one licensed general contractor, 9 years in Hamilton County, a truck, a trailer, and a gray Sentry fireproof safe bolted to the floor of my basement that my father gave me the week I got my license at 23. "Keep your paperwork safe," he said when he handed it to me. Leon Briggs was not a man who said much. But that sentence he said twice. I thanked Marcus, told him there'd been a misunderstanding, that I'd sort it out and call him back. Then I climbed down from the roof, sat in the cab of my truck with the engine off, and looked at my phone for a long time without doing anything with it. The check Marcus had given us, the final payment on the Wilcox job, had been $14,200. I knew that number without looking it up because I know all my contract numbers. 9 years of solo contracting trains that into you the way other habits train into other people. Invoices, permit numbers, inspection dates, material cost per square foot. These live in my head the same way phone numbers live in other people's heads. Automatic, permanent, $14,200. Paid to Briggs Construction. Collected by Jax Briggs. The safe had a digital lock. It kept an error log that I'd never had reason to care about until 2 weeks earlier, when I'd opened the log for an unrelated reason and seen 2 failed entry attempts on dates I hadn't been home. I'd told myself it was a misread, a late-night muscle memory mistake, the 4 and the 6 sitting next to each other on the keypad. I wasn't telling myself that anymore. 4 minutes in the truck cab with the radio off and the door closed. A car pulled out of the lot next to the job site and the sound of it came and went. Then I started the engine and pulled onto the road and drove toward home because the safe was in the basement and I needed to see it. To understand what Jax did, you have to understand what Briggs Construction actually is, because in his version of events, the story is simple. We grew up in the same house. We swung the same hammer on our father's weekend jobs. We learned the same trades from the same man. When Leon died 7 years ago, he left his tools to both of us equally, 2 names on the same line of the same will. In Jax's mind, the business was something that grew from all of that, from the family, from the name, and he had simply waited long enough for his share. What he never understood, or decided not to, was that a license is not a name. It is not inherited. It is not shared by proximity, or by blood, or by the fact that you once helped your father hang drywall on a Saturday. The family name on the side of a truck means nothing at the permit window. What means something at the permit window is the number. In the state of Tennessee, a contractor's license is issued to a single person after testing, after proof of insurance, after bonding, after a background check, and after a fee that you pay yourself. Mine is number GC 44817. It is registered to Evan Briggs. It cannot be transferred. Every permit pulled under it in Hamilton County carries my name and my liability. Every contract signed under it is my legal responsibility. You cannot use another man's license. Not legally. Not in any county in this state. I built Briggs Construction from zero. The first 3 years I worked out of my truck and slept on a pull-out sofa in a 1-bedroom apartment because I was putting every profit margin back into the business. I got my bonding. I got my general liability policy. I built a client list one referral at a time. And when the referrals started coming faster, I bought the trailer. And somewhere around year 5, I started keeping everything in that gray safe. The license certificate, the LC operating agreement, the insurance binder, the client contracts, the tax filings going back to the beginning. A man's business lives in his documents. That's what Leon said. He was right. He just didn't know his other son had been listening. The summer I got my license, I was 23 and had been doing sub work for other contractors for 2 years, carrying their tools and learning their methods and banking the difference between what I earned and what I spent, which was not much, because I was not spending much. I had a plan written in a spiral notebook. It said, license at 23, bonding at 24, first solo contract at 25, LLC at 26. I hit every date within a quarter. Leon came to the licensing office with me the morning I picked up the certificate. He didn't say much on the drive there. He was a man who understood that some moments did not require narration. He sat in the waiting room while I signed the paperwork and came out with the envelope and handed it to him without opening it. The way you hand something to the person whose opinion you actually want. He opened it, held the certificate at arm's length the way men his age hold things they need reading glasses for. Read it once. Then he folded it back into the envelope and handed it back to me and said, now you've got something real. That evening he brought the safe to my apartment in the back of his truck, bolted it to the basement floor himself with a bolt kit he'd brought already assembled because he'd planned it ahead, and when it was done he sat back on his heels and looked at it and said, keep your paperwork safe. A man's business lives in his documents. Jax had been there. He was leaning against the wall near the basement stairs, hands in his pockets, watching, when Leon said it. Jax looked at the safe for a moment. Then he looked at me. He smiled the way he smiled at things being given to other people. A smile that was making a decision about whether to want the thing, and deciding not to, for now, because deciding not to was easier than the alternative. I thought about that smile sometimes over the years. I thought about it the week I applied for the LLC. I thought about it when the first big contract came through, the re-roof on a 12-unit apartment building that paid better than anything I'd done to that point. I thought about it in Marcus Ford's truck as we walked the Wilcox Boulevard property before I submitted the bid. I thought about it the afternoon Marcus called to tell me someone had collected his final payment. I'd noticed the truck 6 weeks before Marcus called. Jax had been driving a 2019 Ram with a cracked rear bumper and a check engine light that he mentioned every time I saw him, which wasn't often. We were not close in the way brothers on television are close. We were brothers the way some men are, sharing a last name and a history and a mother who called us both on the same Sunday afternoon and gave us updates on each other's lives that neither of us had asked her to share. Then one Sunday in March, I pulled into Sandra's driveway to drop off the property tax paperwork she'd asked me to help her file, and there was a new truck parked by the fence. Black, current model, crew cab, chrome running boards. The kind of truck a man buys when he has decided he has arrived. I asked Sandra whose it was. She looked at the truck, then at me, with the particular expression she uses when she already knows I'm not going to like the answer. Jax is doing well, she said, and turned back toward the kitchen. That was the whole sentence. Jax is doing well. As though the truck had simply appeared from the goodness of his work ethic, and the details were not something I needed. I did not press her. I filed her tax paperwork and drove home and stood in the kitchen for a moment before I sat down. The Briggs family shape, if you drew it as a diagram, would have 2 children on opposite ends of the same expectation. The expectation was Leon. He was the kind of man who built things from scratch and assumed his sons would too, differently maybe in their own directions, but from scratch. He did not leave money. He left tools and a trade and the knowledge of how to bid a job so you didn't lose your shirt on labor. He left the safe. He left the name. What he could not leave was the willingness to do the work. Jax was 34. He had worked 8 or 9 different jobs since high school, none of them lasting more than 2 years. A paint crew in Bradley County, a landscaping company in Ultua. A brief period where he described himself as in logistics, which turned out to mean he was driving a delivery truck for a company that folded in 14 months. Between those jobs there were gaps he described as figuring things out, and that Sandra described to anyone who asked as Jax is between opportunities right now. He's very talented. He was talented. That was the maddening part. He had his father's hands and his father's eye for a job site, and when he showed up to help on my projects, he wasn't dead weight. He could frame, he could hang drywall, he understood load-bearing walls, the way men understand things they learned by watching before they were old enough to hold a tool. If he had gotten licensed, if he had done the paperwork, and the testing, and the bonding, and all the unglamorous infrastructure that a contractor's life actually runs on, he could have built something real. He never wanted to do the paperwork. That was a thing he'd never said out loud, but had always communicated. The paperwork was the part that belonged to people like Evan. Jax was the talent. Evan was the administration. In his version of the family, those two things were supposed to work together, meaning he worked and Evan filed. And the money that came from it belonged to both of them, because they were brothers, and that was how families worked. He had never once asked me whether that was how I saw it. I sat down at the laptop and pulled up the state licensing portal, the way I do every quarter. There were 3 permits I had not filed. Hamilton County. Building permit for a residential re-roof on Standifer Gap Road. Electrical permit for a commercial unit on Broad Street. Structural modification permit for a deck expansion on Signal Mountain. All filed in the previous 8 weeks. All listed under GC 44817. The permit numbers went onto a yellow legal pad, set on the kitchen table, copied carefully the way I copy contract numbers, digits first, then the project address, then the filing date. 3 lines. 3 jobs I had never bid, never inspected, never set foot on. The coffee went cold beside the legal pad. I knew what the permit numbers meant. Every licensed contractor in Tennessee knows what it means when a permit is filed under your number. It means you are legally responsible for that work. If the roof fails, if the deck collapses, if an inspector finds a code violation on the Broad Street commercial unit, the complaint goes to GC 44817, which is me, which is my bond, which is my insurance, which is the 9 years I spent making sure my name meant something in Hamilton County. I had not filed those permits. Someone had. The next morning, I called the county permit office and asked about the Standifer Gap job. The clerk put me on hold for 40 seconds. When she came back, she asked me to confirm the license number because she said there had already been 1 inquiry on that permit that week. I confirmed it. She read me the applicant name on file. Jax Briggs, Briggs Construction. I thanked her and hung up the phone and looked at the legal pad on the table. The 3 permit numbers looked the same as they had the night before. The coffee was still cold. Outside, the neighbor's truck started in the driveway and idled for a moment and drove away, and the street went quiet, and I sat with the legal pad and understood that the thing I'd been half suspecting since the error log in March had finished becoming real. Sandra's summer cookouts had been a fixture since I was a child. Last Sunday of every month, May through September, same yard, same folding tables with the checkered cloth that had faded from red to pink over 20 years of washings. Uncle Dougie ran the grill. Sandra made sweet tea in the same gallon pitcher she'd had since the 90s, the one with the chip on the spout that she'd never replaced because her mother had given it to her. I arrived early in May because Sandra had asked me to help move the tables. I parked on the street, came through the side gate, and heard Jax's voice before I saw him. He was in the back corner of the yard by the fence, turned away from the house, phone pressed to his ear. His voice was low, but the yard was quiet, and I was closer than he thought. "No, that's my business," he was saying. "I've been running it 2 years. The license is in the family name. My brother's got it on paper, but we run it together." He paused. Then, the Henderson job will be done by the 15th. Yeah, I've got everything filed. I stood at the screen door with a bag of ice in both hands. I set the ice on the counter. I took out my phone. I opened the voice memo app. And then I went back outside through the front door, walked around the block, came back in through the side gate again, called out a hello, and watched Jax put his phone in his pocket and turn around with a smile. "Brother," he said, like the word was a handshake. "Hey, Jax," I said. We moved the tables. That night I went to the basement. The safe's error log showed 5 failed entry attempts over the previous 2 months, all between midnight and 2 in the morning. The keypad had a small scratch near the 4 key that I didn't put there. I opened it with my combination. Inside, the original contractor license certificate was gone. The LLC operating agreement was gone. 2 of the 3 signed client contracts from earlier that year were gone. Everything else was in order: the insurance binder, the tax filings, the bonding certificate, which Jax apparently hadn't known to take, or hadn't needed yet. I photographed every page that remained. I photographed the scratch on the keypad. I photographed the inside of the empty folder where the license had been. Then I called Stephen Clay. Stephen was the attorney I'd used when I formed the LLC, and again when a subcontractor dispute went sideways 3 years ago. He was methodical and unhurried, and he did not express alarm at things that didn't require alarm. I told him everything. The permit records, Marcus Ford's call, the overheard conversation, the missing documents. He listened without interrupting, which is something I've always respected about him. When I finished, he said, "You filed a complaint with the licensing board 6 weeks ago when you found the permit irregularities." It wasn't a question. He drafted that complaint himself. I said yes. He said, "Then Agent Weems' investigation has been open for 6 weeks. She has your documentation. She's already contacted 2 of the 3 clients." A pause. "The cease and desist goes out Monday morning." I thanked him. I hung up. Outside, the neighbor's sprinkler system clicked on and swept across the fence in its slow mechanical arc, the same way it did every night at 10. I made a new folder on my desktop. Briggs Construction, unauthorized use. Scanned everything into it. Backed it to the cloud. Sent Stephen the digital copies. Then I went to bed. Jax came to my house Monday morning at 7:45. The new truck idled in the driveway for a moment before the engine cut off, the kind of pause a man makes when he's rehearsing an entrance. He knocked once and I opened the door. He was smiling, which I'd expected. The smile Jax uses when he wants something is wide and slightly ahead of his eyes, like a man projecting confidence from slightly further away than he actually is. He said we needed to talk. He said it the way you say it when you've decided the conversation is already settled, and this is the part where you explain the settlement. I said, "Come in." I made coffee. I sat across from him at the kitchen table. He started with the one about us being brothers. He said Leon would have wanted them both in the trade, that their father never meant for one son to hold a piece of paper over the other. He said the name Briggs meant something in this county before Evan ever applied for a license, and that the reputation Evan had built was built partly on that name, which Jax had also carried his whole life. He used the word "we" 11 times in 4 minutes. I counted without meaning to, because counting things is how I stay steady when I'm deciding not to speak. Then he shifted registers. He said the business had more work than he could handle alone, which I noticed was no longer we but he, and that a partnership going forward would actually benefit both of them. He said the clients on the 3 jobs had been happy with the work, which was probably true because Jax could do the work when he showed up, and showing up had not been his problem. Then he said he'd been planning to bring Evan in formally anyway, that this was just the push they needed to have the conversation. I almost said something there. What stopped me was the memory of a Tuesday morning 11 years ago, when I sat across from a testing administrator at the state board office and filled in a 4-page application and paid a fee out of the checking account I'd been building for 2 years. The testing alone took 3 hours. The bonding process took 6 weeks. The insurance ran me $900 the first year. None of it was handed to me. None of it was in the family name. It was $900 in 3 hours, and a Tuesday morning that Jax had not spent in that testing room because he'd decided the paperwork was mine to deal with. The thought went. Then he put his hand flat on the table and dropped his voice to the register menus when they want to sound reasonable above everything else. You're going to throw away your family over paperwork? I looked at him. His coffee was untouched, still steaming a little, growing a thin skin on the surface. I said, Stephen Clay sent you something this morning. He said he'd seen it. I said, read it. He left 10 minutes later. I watched the new truck back out of the driveway, slow and careful the way men drive expensive things, and I poured his coffee down the sink and rinsed the mug and put it back in the cabinet. The sprinklers in the yard across the street were on again, even though it had rained the night before. Sandra called that afternoon. She did not open with hello. She opened with, I need you to understand that your brother is trying. She said it the way she said everything she'd already decided, without a question mark at the end, without room for a response. Because a response was not what she was calling for. She was calling to inform me of the correct interpretation of events, which was the thing she'd always done when events ran counter to her preferred version of the family. She said this family did not go to lawyers over misunderstandings. She said the word misunderstanding 3 times in 4 sentences, which was the second thing I counted that day without meaning to. Then she built toward the line the way she'd been building toward it since Monday. The way she built toward everything she'd decided to say, step by step, with pauses that were not actually pauses, but were instead her waiting to see if you'd hand her the momentum back. I did not hand it back. I let the pauses sit. He finally looks like the successful son. She said it simply. Not cruelty, exactly. Something more honest than cruelty. The thing a woman says out loud when she has spent long enough thinking it, that she has stopped noticing it might wound someone. One question, whether she knew her home address had been listed as the registered business address on 2 of the 3 permit applications. She went quiet. I said it had been done without her knowledge or consent, and that her address appearing on fraudulent permit filings was something the licensing board was aware of. She said that wasn't what she'd meant to ask about. I told her I'd see her Sunday. I told her to make sure Jax came. I hung up and set the phone on the table. Outside, the light was going amber the way it does in late afternoon and late spring in Tennessee. Everything warm and unhurried looking, the trees on the ridge going gold before the day finished. Then I called Agent Weem. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was flat and professional, and she'd been doing this long enough that nothing I said was going to surprise her. I told her about Sunday. I told her the address. I told her the cookout started at noon and Jax was usually there by 1. She said, "We'll be there at 2:15. I thanked her. I marked it in my calendar the way I mark everything. Date, time, location, names present. Sunday came the way Sundays do in May in Chattanooga, warm before it gets hot. The kind of morning that makes you believe the afternoon will be reasonable. It won't be. But the morning lies well. I got to Sandra's at 11:30. Uncle Dougie was already at the grill with his apron on, the one that said "World's Okayest Chef" that someone had given him as a joke 15 years ago, and that he wore without irony because he genuinely did not care. He waved a spatula at me when I came through the gate and said the Lookouts had won last night, and asked if I'd caught it. I told him I'd caught the last 4 innings. He said that was enough. Sandra was on the back porch with the tea pitcher, filling glasses for the cousins who'd arrived early. She looked at me when I came around the corner of the house and held the look for a half-second longer than usual, checking something, and then she nodded and went back to pouring. Whatever she was checking for, I didn't give it to her. The checkered tablecloth was already out, pink now, more than red, 20 years of washings. The folding tables in their usual configuration. The yard smelled like charcoal and cut grass and the early jasmine on the back fence. A kid I didn't recognize was bouncing a basketball near the garden bed. The extra chairs came from the garage, and I set up the condiment table after that. I talked to Uncle Dougie about the lookouts, and to a cousin about her new job, and I moved through the yard the way I always moved through Sandra's cookouts. Quietly, usefully, without drawing attention to the folder in the truck bed, or the two agents who would arrive at 2:15, or the text I had already drafted and was waiting to send. Jax arrived at 12:50 in the new truck. He parked it at the curb where everyone could see it, which had always been his way with things he wanted people to notice. He came through the gate grinning, slapping backs, working the yard the way he worked every room, loud without being aggressive, present without being specific. Sandra lit up when she saw him. He kissed her on the cheek, and she held his face for a moment the way she'd never once held mine. I was by the garage when Marcus Ford came through the gate at 1:45. Jack saw him across the yard, and his smile dropped one register but recovered fast. They'd met before, on the Wilcox job, when Marcus had stopped by the site, and Jax had been there, helping. The way he helped on jobs sometimes, when he showed up without being asked. Marcus nodded at me. I nodded back. At 2:13, I took out my phone and typed an address into a text message. Sent it. Sent it to one number. At 2:15, Agent Patricia Weem and a second investigator from the Tennessee Department of Commerce and Insurance walked up the driveway in plain clothes with credentials on lanyards. Jax was mid-sentence in a story about the Signal Mountain Deck job. He turned when the gate opened, the way everyone turned, and his sentence stopped where it was, halfway through a word. Hanging in the air over the charcoal smoke, he looked at the lanyards. He looked at me. I said, "The garage." 14 people stood in the yard, and 4 stood in the garage doorway. Uncle Dougie had set down the tongs. Sandra was holding the tea pitcher with both hands. Agent Weem introduced herself and her colleague. She explained that they were there regarding an ongoing investigation into the unauthorized use of Tennessee Contractor License GC 44817. She said it the way she said everything, plain and unhurried, like a person reading the weather. Jack said there was a misunderstanding. He used the same word Sandra had used on the phone, which told me they'd talked. Agent Weem asked if he had any documentation showing authorization to use that license number. He said it was a family business. She asked again, specifically for written authorization. He looked at me. The safe was in the corner of the garage, the gray Sentry. Bolts still in the floor where Leon and I had anchored it 12 years ago. The drill marks around the lock were visible from 8 feet away if you knew to look. Agent Weem looked. She asked what had happened to the lock mechanism. I said, it was intact the last time I opened it. She asked when that was. I said, the Tuesday before the permit irregularities first appeared in the county database. Jack said I was making it sound like something it wasn't. I put 3 pieces of paper on the worktable. The LLC operating agreement, sole member Evan Briggs. The state license certificate, GC 44817, issued to Evan Briggs. And the first page of one client contract, signed at the bottom, Jax Briggs, Briggs Construction, with my license number printed in the block below the signature line. I said, that's his signature on my license number. That was the 4th sentence I'd spoken since the agents arrived. Agent Weem picked up the contract and read the bottom half of it without expression. Her colleague was writing in a notebook. Marcus Ford, standing in the garage doorway, had his arms crossed and was looking at a point somewhere above Jax's left shoulder. Jax started with the tools. He said their father left the tools to both of them, and the business came from those tools, and it was never meant to be only Evan's. He said it the way he'd said everything in my kitchen that Monday morning, which was the way he'd probably been saying it to himself since March, when the new truck arrived and the story he'd built started needing to hold weight. He said he'd only been trying to work. Sandra made a sound from the doorway. Not words, just a sound. Agent Weem set the contract down. She told Jax that using another person's contractor license without written authorization was a violation of Tennessee Code Annotated 626136, that the penalties included fines and potential criminal referral, and that she needed him to come with her to the field office to provide a formal statement. Jax looked at Sandra. Sandra looked at the tea pitcher. Both hands around it, the way she'd held it since she came to the garage doorway. She wasn't pouring anything, she was just holding it, the way you hold something when the ground shifts and you need an object in your hands to prove you're still standing in the same place you were a moment ago. A cousin named Beth, who'd been standing near the back wall of the garage with a paper plate, set the plate down on the workbench. She didn't say anything. She just set it down and crossed her arms and looked at the floor. Uncle Dogie by the grill in the yard picked the tongs back up and turned the chicken without looking over. The charcoal smoke drifted past the garage opening and mixed with the cut grass and the jasmine on the back fence. And for a moment, the whole yard had the ordinary smell of a Sunday in May in Tennessee, and none of the rest of it was in that smell at all. Jax tried one more time. He turned to Agent Weem and said that in their family the tools had always been shared, that their father had built the business from nothing and left it to both of them, and that what he'd done was continue something that already existed, not steal something that belonged to someone else. Agent Weem listened. Her expression did not change. When he finished, she said, "Do you have your father's will with you today?" He said he didn't have it on him. She said, "Does that will name Briggs Construction LLC or license number GC 44817? He said he didn't know the exact wording. She said, "The LLC was formed 4 years after your father's death. The license was issued to your brother 18 months after that. Neither of them existed when your father made his will." She closed her notebook and looked at him. "What your father left you is separate from what your brother built. You may feel they're the same thing. Tennessee law does not agree." Jax stood there for a moment. Someone's kid had turned on the hose near the back fence, and the sound of it carried over everything, thin and steady. He looked at me one last time, not with anger, with something that looked like a man realizing that the story he'd been telling himself for months, the one where he was owed this, where the family name made it legitimate, where Evan's paperwork was just paperwork and not the actual substance of something he had built, had just been heard out loud by people who did not share the story. He nodded once. Then he went with the agents. 3 things happened in the following days that I want to tell you as they happened, not as a list. Because they are not a list. They are moments, and moments are different from summaries. The first, Stephen Clay called on Wednesday morning while I was on a job in Red Bank. He told me the civil complaint had been filed and that the 3 clients were cooperating. The total in unauthorized collections was $41,350 across the 3 contracts. Jax had collected $31,000 of it. Stephen said restitution would be part of any civil judgment. I was standing next to my truck with the door open and the radio on low, and the sound of framing hammers from somewhere inside the structure behind me. I wrote the number in my notebook. $41,350. Then I closed the notebook and went back to work. The second, Sandra called on a Thursday evening 2 weeks after the cookout. I let it ring. Not out of anger, exactly, but because I had learned over the course of this thing that my mother's phone calls carried different weight than they used to. And I needed to know what kind of call this was before I decided how to receive it. She left a voicemail. 43 seconds. She said she hadn't known the extent of it. She said Jax had told her it was a partnership and she'd believed him. She said the word sorry once, near the end, quickly, the way a person says a word they're not sure they've earned the right to say yet. I listened to it twice. I did not call back that night. The phone went face down on the kitchen counter, and the estimate got finished. The third, Marcus Ford came by the shop on a Friday afternoon in June, ostensibly to talk about a new job on his duplex on McCallie. We talked about that for 20 minutes. Then he said, before he left, that he'd given Agent Weem a written statement 3 weeks before the cookout, when she'd first contacted him, and that he'd figured it was the right thing, and he hoped it had helped. He said it the way men like Marcus say things, simply and without expectation of response. I told him it had. He nodded and shook my hand and drove away in his truck, which was several years old and unremarkable, the kind of truck a man drives, because it works. The licensing board issued a formal finding against Jax in August. The unauthorized use violation carried a civil penalty of $12,000 and a prohibition against applying for any contractor license in the state of Tennessee for 5 years. The criminal referral to the district attorney's office resulted in a charge of theft by deception under Tennessee law for the $31,000 in payments collected under false pretenses. The charge was pending plea negotiation as of the time I'm telling you this. The new truck went back. Not voluntarily, but it went back. Because a man facing a theft charge and a 5-figure civil penalty and a restitution order cannot keep a truck he bought with someone else's money. He turned in the plates on a Tuesday morning, and a friend drove him home. Sandra and I talk. Not often, and not yet the way we used to, but the calls come on Sunday afternoons again, which they'd stopped doing for a while. She doesn't mention Jax on those calls unless I ask. I don't ask often. Uncle Dougie texted me in September. No context. Just, those were good ribs at the cookout. I replied, you did good work. He sent back a thumbs up. That was the whole conversation. And it was enough. The thing about building something from scratch is that it continues whether you're watching it or not. Permits get filed. Inspections get passed. Clients call referrals. Referrals call their friends. The accumulation is slow enough that you forget it's happening, and then one quarter you look at the books and realize the number is higher than last year, and the year before that. And you think about the pull-out sofa, and the empty margin years, and the fact that none of this came from anywhere except your own uninterrupted effort. 6 months on, Briggs Construction is doing the same thing it was doing before March. Permits filed under GC 44817. Jobs in Hamilton County, and a few now in Bradley County to the south. The trailer is the same one, a few more miles on it. The gray Sentry safe is still in the basement, but it has a new lock. A mechanical one this time. A combination I haven't written down anywhere, because some things you just remember. I think about my father sometimes when I open it. Leon Briggs did not have a lot of patience for people who confused proximity with ownership. He used to say that the difference between watching a man work and doing the work yourself was the same as the difference between watching a river and knowing how to swim. You could stand on the bank your whole life. It didn't make the water yours. He said it about other people. He never thought he'd need to say it about his sons. The license certificate is back in the safe where it belongs. New copy, same number. GC 44817. The new one got framed and hung on the office wall, which I hadn't done with the original, because the original I just filed away and forgotten, the way you forget things that feel permanent. The new one I look at sometimes when I'm at the desk doing estimates, not for any particular reason, just because it's there, and it's mine, and those two things stopped feeling like the same thing for a while. When I lock the safe at night, I give the dial one extra turn, the way my father taught me, because a lock that's only set once is a lock that's still thinking about being opened. I don't think about Jax the way I used to. Not with the thing that used to live behind my sternum when his name came up. What I think about, when I think about any of this, is Marcus Ford on a Tuesday afternoon in April, standing wherever he was standing when he made that call, deciding to tell me instead of deciding to stay out of it. He didn't have to call. It wasn't his problem. He called because it was the right thing, and because men like Marcus Ford do the right thing without making a production of it, which is why I will work with him again whenever he has a job that needs doing. That call was the whole thing. Everything that followed was just the paperwork catching up. And in Hamilton County, Tennessee, the paperwork always catches up. The gray Sentry safe is still in the corner of the basement, new lock and all, bolts still in the floor where Leon and I set it. Some nights I go down there for no reason, not to open it, just to confirm it's where it is. Still solid, still anchored, still exactly where I put it. It is. It always is. Drop a comment and tell me if this one hit close. Subscribe for the next one.